Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 9 of The Loud House, Ties That Bind. We begin this segment with a typical Saturday morning at the Loud House. During all the commotion, Lincoln ends up in the bathroom, and that's where he overhears his parents talking in the vents, because the bathroom vent is connected to the vent in the parents' room. What Lincoln hears is he thinks that Mrs. Loud is demanding that Mr. Loud get rid of all 11 of them. He fears that she's talking about the 11 Loud siblings, and he rushes to warn off his sisters. What he doesn't hear, but we, the audience, hear, is that in reality, Mrs. Loud is talking about Mr. Loud's tie collection. When Lincoln gives his warning to his sisters, they don't really take it seriously. But when Lincoln brings Lori to hear the conversation through the vent, she begins to fear that Lincoln's fears are accurate, because once again the conversation sounds suspiciously like the siblings, even though it's really about ties. This worries the siblings, and they panic about what they're going to do. Lincoln thinks that maybe if they're well behaved and if they're quiet, it'll persuade their mom not to want to have any of them be thrown out. So that's what all 11 Loud siblings do. They act quiet and well behaved. Some examples of this include Lori not getting mad at Lenny for borrowing some of her clothes. The twins are acting civil with each other. Luna decides to use acoustic instruments, and Luann acts like a mime, right down to not just dressing like one, but not talking either. All she's missing is the white face paint. And when Lincoln's about to head to the bathroom, he hears the parents talking through the vents again, and he calls his sisters in so they can listen. And it sounds like Mrs. Loud won't make Mr. Loud get rid of them all, and this puts them all at ease. And then they all leave to let Lincoln use the bathroom. But as that happens, Lincoln hears the Mrs. Loud continue what she was saying that she'll only allow him to keep one of them. And she says the one that stands out to him the most. And again, thinking that they're talking about the siblings, Lincoln tries to do what he can to stand out. Like, he tries to make a big breakfast sort of meal for his dad to win him over, but Lola catches him right before he can get there, and then she gets him to pretty much makes him confess what he heard, and to the rest of the sisters as well. And Lincoln admits that he was panicked and was in a state of fear. But before they can continue any further, they hear the parents talking again through the vents, and this time we hear Mr. Loud lists off his different ties, but the way he describes them sounds suspiciously like the sisters. And Mrs. Loud shoots down why she doesn't like each tie, but each sister fears it's about them. And because of the dialogue, they make it sound like Lincoln's the only Loud sibling they'll keep, and we do see Lincoln have an imagination sequence about what life as an only child would be like. He kind of imagines the other rooms being turned into a theme park, and Clyde giving him a only child club certificate or ticket or something like that. But when the sisters leave to gather their things, Lincoln hears the conversation continue, and then it sounds like Mrs. Loud says only get rid of one rather than get rid of all but one. And then it sounds like Mr. Loud says the one with the white hair, and saying he doesn't even think it's his. And Lincoln fears that he's talking about him. In reality, he's talking about an Easter tie because hare is another word for bunny or rabbit. So Lincoln actually calls the sisters together, reveals what he thinks is the parents kicking him out, and he tries to give his treasured belongings to his sisters, but they decide they don't want the parents to kick Lincoln out, so they all go into the parents' room to say that they don't want him to get rid of Lincoln. But then we find out the kids find out what we, the audience, found out early on, that they really were just talking about ties. And when Lola let slip that they thought they were going to get rid of them, the parents laugh this off. Mrs. Loud says she'd never make Mr. Loud get rid of any of them and wouldn't want to get rid of any of them herself, saying all 10 of them are special to her, but Mr. Loud has to correct her that there's 11 of them in total. So then we cut to a week later, the next Saturday morning, and it starts similarly to how the segment began. And once again, during the commotion, Lincoln winds up in the bathroom, but then he overhears Mr. Loud exclaiming that Mrs. Loud has a bun in the oven, and Lincoln rushes off to warn his sisters, but the segment ends revealing that Mr. Loud is talking about a literal bun in the oven, not another kid along the way. Now, this segment I felt was a good example of how misunderstandings have a way of causing problems that were never intended to begin with, because I think we've all been down that path before where someone may have misunderstood what we meant, or we misunderstood what someone else meant, and it kind of led to a whole chain of events, and that's never easy to deal with that. The way the segment played out, though, a lot of people, and I myself agree with this, noted it seemed very similar to a segment from the classic Powerpuff Girls series, the one from the late 90s, early 2000s, Little Miss Interprets. And it's worth pointing out because that segment in particular came from one of the last two seasons of the classic Powerpuff Girls series, the seasons where Chris Savino, the creator of the Loud House, was the showrunner. So maybe that was an inspiration for this segment. I mean, it's not too far-fetched of an idea anyway. And as far as seeing some of them try to act well behaved, I thought that was pretty funny. I liked Luann's mime routine because it reminded me of when I was in high school. One of my drama class actually had us act like mimes for the entirety of Halloween, right down to not talking, and we actually did have the face paint, unlike Luann. And I apparently was the one who got the best grade in that. Apparently, if what my teacher said was any indication, I apparently was very good at keeping up with the project. And apparently the future classes, which had their own set of mimes, she apparently based their performances off of how I performed as a mime. So that was a nice compliment to me. I was really flattered that I set a good example for future mimes, or future students that had to act like mimes. But I'm getting a little off topic there, and what else can I say? Oh, the scene where Lincoln imagines where life would be like as an only child. A lot of people were actually not very happy about that segment. Usually a lot of people use that segment against Lincoln, acting like how he seemed thrilled at the prospect of not having siblings anymore, but I didn't personally have much of a issue with that, mostly because not too long after, Lincoln suddenly thought he was the one being kicked out, so I thought some felt that might have just been a suitable punishment for it, and because really none of them were in danger to begin with. And on the other hand, some people made a valid point that if they feel that if it were one of the sisters seemed like she was the only one not being kicked out, they feel like she probably would have acted the same way that Lincoln had there, because really the whole what would life be like as an only child thing, that's something that happens in real life. Yeah, there are instances where you get annoyed with your sibling to the point where you wonder what would it be like if they weren't around. And at first it might seem like all sunshine and rainbows, but then yeah, I think the realization comes in that they're really good people. Unless you do have an actually bad sibling who really is a bad person, like we're not talking just typical sibling squabbles, we're talking more serious situations, more if you I'm sure you get what I mean by that. And in this case, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that was just Lincoln kind of fantasizing, kind of because he might have been focusing more on his shall we say, less flattering interactions with his sisters in that moment. But as the later on showed, the sisters were willing to defend Lincoln and not let him be kicked out when they thought that. So again, it was a nice way to show siblings aren't always gonna get along with each other, but when push comes to shove, if you really do have a good sibling relationship and they're all good people, then you'll stand by each other, and that's a good thing. As for the ending, though, where the parents assure them that they wouldn't kick any of them out, some feel that has become a case of harsher in hindsight because of a certain segment in season 2. If you're really familiar with the show, I'm pretty sure you know which segment I'm talking about, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm not looking forward to it, but I did say I would give my recap and thoughts for all the segments, so I gotta try soldier on. And we'll get to that when we get there. But on its own, I thought it was a good segment. I liked it. I didn't really have much gripes with it. So just like the its sibling segment, Overnight Success, I enjoyed both of them. So I don't think I favored one over the other more necessarily, but I didn't really dislike either of them, but I felt they were both enjoyable. They weren't like middle of the road or just theirs. It was enjoyable. Maybe not my absolute favorites from the season, but still enjoyable nonetheless. And with that, we've now covered both segments for episode 9 on this channel. Take care, and until next time.